Of course, the moment I sit down to film, maintenance in my apartment complex decides this is time to make a whole bunch of noise. Hi, I'm Anne, welcome back to my channel, and today, as the sign suggests, out with old books and in with new books. Today I'm going to be doing a pretty big end of year unhaul of books. So these are books that I have read or tried to read at least. Some of these are DNFs from mostly the previous year, since last year. I think last year I did a big unhaul, and I want to do that every single year where I try to go through my books, see which books that I really still value and want to read, and which books I don't really care for. So I have 27 books here by my feet, so let's just jump in and introduce them. Most of them I won't be going into detail as to why I don't like them. The first one is The Paris Seamstress by Natasha Lester. I read this earlier this year, and it was just a very meh historical drama. The next one is Six Questions of Sophocles by Christopher Phillips. This is about a man who hosts these Sophocles cafes where he goes around the world having philosophical discussions with different groups of people. It was an interesting book, but I don't see myself ever wanting to read it again. The next one is Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This one I had mixed feelings about because I really loved the mystery and true crime type aspects, but some of the other stuff I didn't enjoy that much. So I don't see myself ever rereading this, even though it's not a bad book, and Erik Larson is an incredible writer. The next one is His Majesty's Opponent, Subhas Chandra Bose and India's Struggle Against the Empire by Sugata Bose. So this one is about a kind of independent fighter during World War II, kind of around that era. It was a really interesting book. I read it for my India World War II class. Really interesting, but I don't see myself ever rereading it. The next one is another Erik Larson one, and that's In the Garden of Beasts by Erik Larson. So this one takes place in Nazi Germany. It kind of follows this American diplomatic family during the rise of Nazism in Germany. Very interesting book. Again, like, I would recommend anyone to read this because it's a really good and interesting book, but I don't see myself rereading it again. Next one is The Making of Wisconsin by Smith, and I can't remember Smith's first name. I know it's a female author, but that's all I know. I bought this years ago as like an old book that I wanted to own, but I wasn't a huge fan of like the history of it and how it's very much for children, and yeah, I don't see myself ever rereading it. The next one is Nanjing Requiem by Ha Jin. This is a fictionalized retelling of the rape of Nanjing, which is a really sad and tragic part of World War II when the Japanese invaded China and just raped and pillaged throughout China. It was a horrible incident. But this book is fictionalized retelling, and Iris Chang wrote a great novel, The Rape of Nanking, which I highly recommend. But this one was very watered down for just how horrible the tragedy was, and I wanted it to be more. So not a bad book, but I don't see myself ever wanting to reread it. Next one is The Other Wes Moore, Two Names, Two Fates by Wes Moore. This is about a man who does research and finds about this other man who's about his age, who has his same name, but they had very different backgrounds. He ended up obviously as an author, a journalist, and this other guy ended up in prison. So it's interesting to contrast those two lives. I ended up DNFing this one. I just couldn't get into it that much. Not that it's a bad book, just not my type of book. The next one is Save the Date by Morgan Matson. I bought this from the Dollar Tree a few years ago, and I finally started reading it, and I just hated the first chapter so much that I just could not continue reading it. So there's somebody out there who will like a fun, light comedy romance, but this book was definitely not for me. The next one is Prayer for Beginners by Peter Kreeft. There's so many better theological type books that examine prayer out there that this one I just don't see myself rereading. It was a fun book to read and I enjoyed reading it, but I don't see myself going back to it. Next one is The Mandarin by Robert Elegant. This one is a historical novel following a kind of British merchant in Shanghai and China. And it follows like this romance. I couldn't get into it. I ended up DNFing it like I think 50 pages in. The next one is Sources of Chinese Tradition, from the earliest times to 1600. I wasn't a big fan of this book. I ended up skimming like the second half of it because I just wasn't enjoying how it was written. I think I talked about it more whenever I first read it, but yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of history books about China that I own, and this one was not the best. Next one is The Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Yeah, so I read about, I think, half this book before I DNF'd it. I really disliked it, which seems to be a less popular opinion on BookTube because a lot of people on BookTube seem to love it, but it wasn't the book for me. It was just, I didn't like any of the characters. None of them had a lot of like good value boat traits, and I prefer my characters to have some morals, an inclination of morals, and these characters did not. So yeah, it's a classic Western, but I'm getting rid of it, obviously. The next one is The Davinci Code by Dan Brown. I did a whole rant review when I read this book. I hated it. I read Angels and Demons last year, I think, and I also hated that one, so I don't think Dan Brown is for me. So yeah, definitely getting rid of this one. The next one is A Murder with Peacocks by Donna Andrews. This wasn't a bad mystery. I just couldn't get into it. It was just very, meh when it comes to cozy mysteries. And I have found that I don't like modern cozy mysteries as much as I like historical cozy mysteries, so just a preference case. It's not a bad book. The next one is Into the Fire by Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy is an author that I've never been able to get into. My dad really got into him, and I've never been able to. I just don't like thrillers all that much, and if I do, I like the focus more to be on the characters instead of the action. He's just not the author for me. I couldn't get into this book. Next one I read last month, and that's Going to the Sources, A Guide to Historical Research and Writing by Anthony Bundage. So this one I talked about last month, that it was a very meh read. I just thought that a lot of the information was obvious or obsolete, so yeah, I'm getting rid of it. Next one is the Norton Anthology of English Literature, The Middle Ages. I actually bought this to study the Middle Ages, and then I discovered it upon reading it that I actually own a Norton Anthology already, and this is just the first part of the other Norton Anthology that I own. So I'm getting rid of this because I already own, technically, another copy of it. The next book is The Davinci Hoax by Carl E. Olson and Sandra Meisler. This one, I enjoyed it because it documented a lot of like the issues that I had with Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. However, I don't see myself ever rereading it, and I think there's a lot of value to getting this book back in the world so that more people can read this and say, oh yeah, the Da Vinci Code is complete bollocks. The next one is Hungry Bengal, War, Famine, and the End of an Empire by Janam Mukherjee? I'm so sorry. Indian names are difficult. This one I also had in my India and World War II class. This one was a very hard book to read because it talks about a famine that swept over India during World War II that was mostly government caused because of how it was being run. So a very hard book to read, but a beautiful book, but I don't see myself ever rereading it. So, all right. The next book is Never Rescue a Rogue by Virginia Heath. This one was just like a light, cozy historical romance. I thought I would like it more, but for me it was very meh. It wasn't bad, but I don't see myself ever rereading it. The next one is Young 'Un by Herbert Betz. This one I tried to read, couldn't stand it, so I'm getting rid of it. It's about this like group of this family in like upstate New York during like the Western era. I don't know if my states are right. I don't know. Next one is Heidi's Children by Charles Tritton. This is, I believe, the third book in the Heidi series. So the first Heidi book was written by the original author, and I don't remember her name. Joanna Spieries. So she wrote the original book, and then this man continued on in the series. I tried to read it, and I just couldn't get into it. So, yeah. Next one is Style on the Man by Alan Foose. Flusher. So I got this more for my husband than for me because I thought it would be really good to get ideas about how to help my husband with his fashion. And this book was not that useful at all. And yeah, it was very meh. So yeah, I'm getting rid of it. Next one is Take, Burn, and Destroy by S. Thomas Russell. This one I ended up DNFing. I just couldn't get into it. I think it was the characters I just didn't enjoy that much. Not a bad book, but not for me. Next one is My Dearest Darkest by Kayla Cottingham. This is at least it felt to me like this very typical like YA girl goes to this mysterious school. There's something like supernatural and like powers going on. I don't know. I didn't like it. I ended up DNFing it. I just couldn't get into it. Next one is Archangel by Margaret Fortune. I actually bought this for my husband when we were first dating because I knew he was into sci-fi, but he never read it and I tried to read it and I wasn't a huge fan, so I'm getting rid of it. And the last one is War in Korea and the Complete History of World War II. When I tried to read this, I just hated the author's voice. He's very like condescending to a lot of people and like very obnoxious. So I just couldn't get into his writing style. So there are all the books that I am getting rid of this year. I plan to either donate these books or I have a plan later on in the beginning of next year where I'm going to go to a bunch of little free libraries and drop off some of these books and maybe pick up a couple, but I'm not allowed to pick up that many because my physical TBR is just so massive, but we'll see where that takes me. So have you read any of these books? Have you gotten rid of a whole bunch of books recently? I know I've seen a few booktubers getting rid of a bunch of books. So do you get rid of books? Do you just buy books and never get rid of books? Do you have a hoarding issue? Because I certainly do. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!